Hello and welcome to Kelly's Anesthesia Tips. Today I wanted to share some information that I read while I had some off time, and I know that I have been asked to do something for Decision Health on pain blocks later this year, but I want to try to get the word out now rather than later. So if you've seen some of my block channel block coding things before, they're usually tied to like Spank or iPacs or things like that. And then I send you over to Doris the Coder for more in-depth on that. But since I'm going to be doing this, and since I learned some information, I am going to do this dedicated to pain blocks and inspired by Dr. Ed Mariano. So I followed him for many years because he's such an excellent resource for acute pain management and regional anesthesia. And he's just, I've shared his website many times with you guys on this YouTube channel. And if you don't follow him on social media, it's a good idea to follow him because he has some great articles and information. So first I wanted to share that. So I picked it up on his LinkedIn, and he says it's out. They wrote a core topic article on Plan A blocks. So this is the first time I've heard that term, Plan A blocks. And I'll tell you that the article was a little bit like clinical. So I pulled out what I could from it, and I'm going to share, but they also had a different article that was more geared toward a lay person, so I'm going to share both of those because I consider myself more lay person than clinically understanding, and always appreciate the opportunity when I get to listen to physicians talk about these kinds of blocks. And then I also will tell you that I believe it was the previous year's ASA, the one that was in Atlanta, where I was surprised to hear a physician who had not ever heard of a certain type of block. And if I recall, it was an iPac, and I was like, whoa, those have been around for a while. I thought everybody had heard about those. But apparently there's some, I guess communication issues with the clinical side of this as well, as far as what they call blocks and how many, what kind of blocks are prevalent in different geographical locations and such. So that's kind of an interesting aside as well. So I'll tell you, I did already follow these links, so I'm going to show you. The first one from here, I believe, is this Plan A blocks in regional anesthesia that I opened up with in the background, because it does give us those anatomical areas. I'll be covering anatomy in the DH meeting later this year as well, but for our post-op pain blocks. A lot is happening on those, and I guess we'll just have to keep our eyes open. And what I'm going to share, some of the information, is just making sure that you're staying up to date on the information, and I'll show you the reasons why. There are a lot of good resources out there, and as I usually do, I will link all of these resources in the section so that you can find your way to them as well. So here we have these different 7 proposed Plan A blocks. And the Plan A blocks are the sciatic nerve, the adductor canal, rectus sheath, erector spinae, interscalene brachial plexus, axillary brachial plexus. So that's kind of like a new concept for us, because we see sometimes an axillary approach to an interscalene brachial plexus, so we need to make sure we know what our clinical staff will be talking about if we see these Plan A blocks and they're described differently like this. And then the femoral nerve. So those are the 7 proposed Plan A blocks. And I mentioned Dr. Mariano, but I'm also going to go back to the beginning of this article and show you that it's a three-peat here. These are 3 anesthesiologists that got together to write this. So it's Dr. Turbitt, Dr. El-Boghdadly, and Dr. Ed Mariano. So as I said, this is the link to, and I can't give you, you can link off of it and read it freely. You just can't download and print from here. There are other areas, like I said, I saw this here that says plain language summary is available on the journal website. And I'm like, okay, that's for me. So this is your more clinical. It does have like an introduction and where you can go for each of these. The future direction, and I believe that's where, you know, the things that are helpful to coders. Let me blow this up just a little bit so we can see that. The things that are helpful to coders are what do they mean when they say plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, and they give us kind of like an overview here. So their plan A blocks, I believe that will be the first one that they would try, is for the upper limb procedures, shoulder, they would do interscalene brachial plexus, and for a below shoulder limb, they would do the axillary brachial plexus block. Now, those should both still be the 64415. Don't have my book nearby, but I think I have that one memorized very well. Whether it's the interscalene or the axillary, but we want to make sure, because I really would have to ask the doctor here, do you mean that this is an axillary block? And then I'd have to check to see, is there an actual code for an axillary block? And I mentioned this second one on the lower limb hip because we see their plan A block is femoral nerve, which includes the adductor canal. Wait, that might be separate. Again, we're going to have to talk to some docs here. Adductor canal block you may see as ACB, but under plan B, C, D, they have it listed as femoral plus an IPAC, and then ankle sciatic nerve blocks. This popliteal fossa is the one that usually throws because there's a sciatic nerve, and then there's an ankle block that the sciatic nerve comes off of that's a peripheral nerve block. And those are the ones that we usually have to say, what do you mean? Is it the sciatic block or is it a peripheral nerve block at the ankle? And I want to briefly touch on this fascia or fascia iliaca block because coding for that has changed over the years. And you know, in 2025, we did get that whole bunch of new codes. So I'm going to share your resource for that as well. All right, so this is the first article. I am also going to do this plain English one that is referenced in the first link from the Plan A, and I did like the quote. An intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction, which is simply saying there may be a simpler way to do this. And if there is, we sure want to make sure that we're understanding what it is with our clinical staff. Okay, so I went over, I'm going to give you this link, and this link. Now I want to get us over to the other ones that I'm talking about, and there's a few things that happened. So at the ASA meeting this year in Las Vegas, this was discussed a little bit, but not a lot. I did have some questions when I got back from that meeting in January regarding this because it's a little bit unorthodox and not what we usually see. In that there was an article published, and this was right before I went out, so let's see the date here. January the 13th. The meeting was at the end of January. So I had taken these resources with me to maybe discuss with other folks out there because, you know, when they throw new stuff at us, we need our anesthesia friends. So what they're saying in this article basically is that there's an opportunity to build follow-up for single shot nerve blocks, which is not something that I see. There's a documentation solution to preserve patient oversight and revenue. So the link to this one is here. I just want to follow it for you, but that's what you're going to do. Here is the article. I may have already pulled that up for you, so I did it twice, and that's okay. Better twice than none. So yes, I did. I had already pulled up one for you as well, but just following that link, I want to make sure you get to both of those because from our coder's perspective, and now I'm going to have to flop around just a little bit to find myself what I'm looking for. I believe it is here in my inbox. Oh, where is it? In my inbox, because I posted something. Let me try to get to it, folks. Bear with me. I'm still not giving it to me. Well, here, let me try something else. Yeah, let's do it that way. Okay, I'm sorry I could not make this one bigger, but my notes that I had looked up were, okay, we have to be a little bit careful here because we have some restrictions in coding that keep us from reporting certain types of things. Now, keeping in mind that not all payers follow the correct coding initiative, that was a lesson I learned many years ago. I believe it was Blue Shield of Michigan at that time. Might not still be true, that's why we have to keep up to date with things. But at that time they said, well, we don't really follow the correct coding initiative. So that's one of the things you need to make sure that whether they do or they don't as well. So I've got links here, and I'll include them as well, to Chapter 8. For anesthesia, we're in Chapter 2. For block codes, you're thinking like the surgeon, and we're in Chapter 8. So we have to look at those to make sure that if we're providing services for some of these procedures, that they're not bundled into that initial service, like the single shot block. There should be something different that's, giving you that opportunity to unbundle. So I'm going to give you these links as well. All right, so I've talked about the article, I've talked about the Plan A blocks. I said I mentioned fascia iliaca, and I want to get us over to some of my resources, which I will share with you again. MSN is a good resource for this one. They published, and I'll again give you the link for it, some pain block documentation resources when those new codes came out. I actually love these, and shout out to Jimmy Patrick. Hey there. I don't think he may not have written this, but you sure talk to him if you need to, and he'll get you to where you need. But on this particular one, I've made my own notes about them, because when you're looking at something from my perspective, which is an auditor, I have to know a lot of things. I have to know what state you're in, what that policy is, if they have any written policies. I have to know what dates I'm looking at and what policies were in place during the dates that I'm looking at, because if they made a policy change and I'm looking at older records, which happens a lot with court cases and things like that, typically when you're looking back that far, it has something to do with either being asked for records or documentation or something that's making you look further back than a year or two. So keep good notes, and I try to. So here on that documentation resource, I will make on the adductor canal, I'll say this might also be described as a saphenous nerve in adductor canal block, which means I ran across something and asked somebody. Because I surely heck don't, I'm not trained as a doctor, or even if I look up anatomy, sometimes I have to look it up multiple times. So here we have Aetna policy change. Per my notes for the IPAC, Aetna allowed 64450 for IPAC and for lateral femoral cutaneous nerve blocks from 2022 through a certain date. Let's see what that certain date is. From 2022 through April the 27th of 2023. So if you're looking at records for April 28th, 2023 and past, you're looking for one code. If you're looking for previous to that, you're looking for another code. And then here we have, like I said, I make my own notes on this. So when I give you this resource, it's going to look like that. You will make your own notes on them. And this one was the one that used to always stick on me when I say they may mean sciatic block. So if you see popliteal, there's not a popliteal nerve block. There's a sciatic nerve block, which is higher up. And then there's an ankle peripheral nerve block, which is 64450. But you really need to know which one they're talking about, because it does make a difference. All right. So I have one more thing, and I'll share it with you here on those block coding notes, because I've been keeping track of this for a long time. And on those fascia iliacas, not everyone subscribes to the CPT assistant, and I get that. So some of us have better access to notes than others, which is why I think it's very important for you to have contacts in this industry, friends in this industry, go to the meetings, try to stay up to date, and that way if you don't have the same type of resources, you at least have some access to the same information. So you will see over here, because I already keyed in I put my keyword of fascia iliaca in here, part of it anyway. And you'll see that back in the day in 2015, they did tell you to file it with 64450, and that was what the instructions were. But they said if you do a paraspinal, interfacial, or a continuous fascia iliaca, it's unlisted codes. That was back in 2015 and 2021. So now you're going to make sure that you're on those. Let's see what this one's December of 2022. So since December of 2022, we've had some guidance from the CPT assistant, keeping in mind that it can be overridden by a Aetna who says this is our policy, and that can happen, and that's why it's important to make good notes. All right, so we've done this one, we've done that one. Let me make sure I've hit everything, folks. I do believe I have. So now I want to go over to talk about where I'm going to be doing the pain block session. So it'll be later this year, November 3rd through the 5th. The agenda's not out yet, and I did do something about this not long ago, maybe trying to encourage those of you who have been doing this for a long time and you might be a little bit nervous about speaking. You have plenty of time, because they were asking for people to step up, and it's because, you know, there's some folks have left the industry and they're not around to do the teaching anymore. And some of us are still here, but we might not be around forevermore either. So there needs to be a new generation of you guys that are going to be willing to step up to say, okay, now I'm getting comfortable because I've been doing this for so long. And I want to be the person that is, you know, knowledgeable and shares my expertise. So if that is you, I am not sure if they're still looking. This was February the 11th. I do know that I've already been asked to cover a few topics here that coders have asked for. One of them is the pain blocks. Another one is anatomy. And if I'm not mistaken, the last one is like orthopedics for spinal, and then head, jaw surgeries. And I'll be working on those later this year to make sure that, you know, we have great information that's still current when we get to talk in November. All right, well, that was pretty much all I wanted to hit for today. 2026 is starting out a little different for me. I hope that yours is starting out really well for you. I look forward to seeing those of you that are going to be coming to, let me share this, it doesn't hurt. Oh, I forgot my for each too, I'll do that. So before I go, let me just show you again that I have a YouTube channel. You must have found me now if you're watching this. And then I have two things for education. One is speaking engagements, because if I'm speaking there, I'm putting it on. So I already know that I'll be speaking at the AIA-BPM in Chandler, Arizona coming up next month. And I hope to see you there if you're able to come. If not, you know, I've got to save the date on here for Decision Health, because that one's coming up and I don't have anything to share yet for the agenda or any of that, but when I get it, I will. And then there's another tab that's called Seminars and Education. And this is the one where I encourage you guys to say, you know, if you know of any meetings and I don't know about them, I'd love to add them to here so everybody can have access to them. But the ones that I am not speaking at, there's one coming up in just a couple of weeks for clinical directors in anesthesia. I enjoyed that one, not as a clinical director, but as an attendee/speaker when I did that one in Tampa one year. And then the ASA Advance, I've applied to speak. I might not, but if I do, I will see you there as a speaker. And if not, I'll see you there as an attendee. And I'm gonna hunt up my for each YouTube video real quick, because you know how I like to end. And my focus. So be kind to one another. Generous with your knowledge, and support anesthesia meetings. So I hope this has been a helpful block one for you, and I hope to see you at a future meeting.